Good day everyone. I am Hannah Crystal Joyce Bunagan and I'm together with my group mates. Today, we will be presenting to you our topic on gender and language in the workplace. This presentation will explore on how communication styles differ between men and women in professional settings and how these differences impact workplace dynamics. We begin with the three major perspectives. The first one is difference perspectives. These perspectives emphasize distinct communication styles between men and women, often rooted in socialization processes and cultural expectations. So, this view suggests that men and women communicate differently due to socialization. For example, women may ask more questions or use polite forms while men may be more assertive. The second one is dominance perspective. This view focuses on the power dynamics inherent in language use, suggesting that men are more dominant communicators in the workplace, wielding greater control and influence. These look at how language reflects power. For example, in meetings, men may interrupt more often, controlling the flow of conversations. Lastly is the dynamic approaches. This perspective emphasizes the fluid and context-dependent nature of gender and communication, recognizing that power and influence are not fixed, but rather negotiated through interaction. This more modern view says that gender and power are not fixed. For example, a woman might speak assertively in one situation but more passively in another, depending on who she's talking to or the context. Now, let's proceed to the professional layperson interaction. Early research are focused on interaction between professionals such as doctors and nurses and their interaction between their patients, analyzing patterns of interruption, topic control, and directive styles. Early studies analyze interaction between professionals like doctors and lay people like patients. For instance, researchers studied how often doctors interrupted with their patients or used directive language. An example would be a male doctor saying, "Take this medication twice a day," versus female doctor saying, "Would you be willing to try this medication twice a day?" So, we see the difference that shows not only gendered communication styles, but also how power is negotiated in conversation. In West's 1984 study, she found that male patients often interrupted female doctors, signaling dominance even though the doctor held the authority or the professional authority. Then, in her 1990 study, she found that female doctors use mitigated directives, like saying, "Perhaps you could try this," or "Perhaps you could try," which were actually more effective in gaining patients' cooperation than the directive style used by male doctors. So, this challenges the assumption that authority always comes from being assertive. It shows that soft approaches can be powerful too. Next is the research of Ainsworth Bohan in the year 1992. This study explored how doctors change topics during consultation. She found that female doctors often use symmetrical topic changes, such as saying, "Before we move on, is there anything else you'd like to ask?" In contrast, male doctors would switch topics, like saying, "Now, let's talk about your medication." This shows that women often strive for shared control in conversation, which can make patients feel more included and respected. Now, let's proceed to the professional interaction. In workplace settings, men often dominate conversations even when they are not in leadership roles. Um, we found three research related on this topic. The first one is the study of Eakins in the year 1979 and the study of Edelsky in the year 1981. They found that men tend to speak more frequently than women in meetings with expected single speaker turns. So they found that men talk longer and more often in meetings, even women are more or even women were more qualified. Next is the study of Woods. Woods observed that male subordinates talking over their female bosses, indicating that gender may override status. Tannen also found out that women leaders often soften criticism, saying things like, maybe this could be improved instead of this needs to be changed. This reflects how women are socialized to avoid confrontation even when they are in charge. Early research often relied on binary and simplistic assumptions about gendered communication, failing to fully account for the complexities of individual behavior and contextual factors. While there may be some observed differences in communication styles between men and women, these differences are not necessarily inherent or fixed, but rather influenced by various factors in social, cultural, and situational. Power dynamics in communication are not solely determined by gender, but also by factors like status, professional role, and the context of the interaction. Dynamic approaches are essential for understanding the nuanced ways in which gender and language are negotiated in the workplace. In this, earlier research viewed gender communication in very black and white terms. But now, we know it's more complex. For instance, or for example, a female engineer may speak differently in a team meeting than when presenting in senior executive. Not because she's inherent passive, but because she adapts to different social cues. Similarly, a male nurse may use more empathetic language in patient care due to the demands of the profession. This dynamic approach recognizes that both gender and language are shaped by culture, context, and individual experience, not just biology.
So I'm Evangeline Alcaide. Now moving forward to dynamic approaches. When we say dynamic approaches, it is analyzing how individuals use language to construct and negotiate their gender identities in social contexts. So for example, is code switching using formal and informal way of communicating. So when we communicate to our friends, we were using um, casual way of communication. But when we are talking to respective person, we're using a formal way of communication. Next, in the mid to late 1990s, social constructionist approaches to language and gender began to develop. In addition, the notion of doing gender in discourse and of communities of practice. Some of these dynamic approaches, such as Kendall and Tannen in 1997, have drawn on the notion of framing following Goffman in 1974 work. So, in the late 1990s, researchers started to looking at language and gender in a new way. They realized that um, gender isn't just about something you are born with, but it is about something that constructs through social interaction and language, and that is called social constructionism. The next one is doing gender. Doing gender is not simply a matter of being male or female. It is an ongoing process of actively performing gender through language, behavior, and appearance. So, in doing gender, for example, a man who performs his masculinity by playing sports. So, sa mga lalaki, mahilig silang maglaro ng mga sports. So, with that, um, doon natin nasasabi na nagagampanan nila yung role nila as a male and natutukoy natin sila as a male by their masculinity, by playing their sports. And we can also natutukoy din natin sila when they are being aggressive in a conversation. So the next one is framing. Framing in interaction are framed or structured in specific ways through language use, influencing how gender is expressed and perceived. Different frames can create different power dynamics. So for example, is teacher uses authority figure. Pwede rin dito yung in a conversation of a male and female, kunwari yung lalaki, sinabi niya na let's take down to business. While yung respond ng babae is gusto niyang i-discuss pa yung project to make it to explore. So with that, dun sa may lalaki, it emphasize productivity and efficiency, while sa respond ng female, it emphasizes the productivity and exploration. And with that, nasasabi nating framing dahil doon nakakabuo ng pag-uusap between two different gender. So the next one is discursive and social constructionist approaches have tended to dominate gender and language in the workplace studies in recent years. The last one, Holmes in 2000B alerts us that any dichotomizing of male and female speech styles results in oversimplification and overgeneralization. So when we say oversimplification, sinasabi nila, may kasabihan na masasabing lalaki kapag more specific sila magsalita or makipag-usap. Napapansin naman natin yung difference between male and female na more on specific magsalita yung mga lalaki compare sa mga babae na maraming pasikot-sikot, while doon na-ignore yung fact na hindi naman lahat ng lalaki is ganon na specific when it comes to communication. And then the overgeneralization is that women are more emotional in their language use. So the diversity of emotional expression among women and the fact that men also express emotions in their language use, and last, the impact of cultural, social, and contextual factors on emotional expression. So dun sa may oversimplification, yung saying na men are always more expressive, yung sinabi ko kanina, in their communication style ignores the fact that not all men exhibit expressive communication style, or should I say aggressive communication style, and women can also exhibit aggressive communication styles. And last, context and individual differences play a significant role in shaping communication style.
My name is Princess Diane Maneha, and my topic is gender discourses at work. We have seen that gender discourses position women and men in certain ways and at the same time. Broader gender discourses like femininity, masculinity, gender differences, and more specific one, just like women as relational and women as emotional. We will now look at some dominant gender discourses in the workplace. First, we have discourses of femininity, appear natural, but in reality, they serve to maintain the status quo and emphasize meaning and values which assume the superiority of males. Example, ideas about women should behave, particularly in professional environments, from the interview of forthcoming by the year 2002 that emphasizes an ideal feminine image of the slim, sexually attractive women in a workplace. Another example, Carrie, I'll just read it first. Coming back off maternity leave, I'm a lot bigger than before, and I think there's quite a change in attitude towards me because of that. For people underneath, yes, they are definitely more switched on to me. For people above or whatever or much, they don't take your opinion seriously. When your father definitely. I'm sure about that I've been on a diet and I'm not getting any younger either. Opinions are not taken as seriously now by her superiors and status equals because she has put on weight. They base on her weight because before when she was a slimmer, younger woman manager. From her experiences, everything changed in her work since she gained weight. Her opinion doesn't matter anymore in her workplace. In order to succeed and to be taken seriously in this workplace, women need to be slim, attractive, and well-groomed. Second, we have discourses of motherhood. According to Holmes and Staub, 2003, also argued that women manage in their data adopted the mother role by being both bossy and supportive in a nurturing manner. They become bossy and supportive at the same time, adopt rational and supportive communication strategies to ensure their leadership style. The mother role literally illustrates how women attempt to construct socially acceptable identities for themselves in order to avoid negative evaluation. Being supportive mother figure in order to mitigate criticism and navigate professional space more effectively. Third, we have discourses of women as emotional and irrational, which is part of an overarching gender differences discourses is also encountered in the workplace. The idea that women are inherently more emotional than men is frequently used to justify workplace inequalities. This discourse is deeply problematic. It transfers perceived differences into systematic disadvantage, reinforcing gendered expectations that frame women are less suitable for leadership roles. Another example, Martin replies to the question of whatever he would prefer to work under the supervision of a woman or man. According to him, I just find men in general. I mean, in the workplace and in general, I just find them to be more stable and straight really than women. He believes that women can't make a rational decision due to hormones. Also, Martin perceived as the norms that the rational, efficient male, as opposed to the emotional and irrational females. Riley, 2002, found that they tended to minimize the gendered nature of their workplace experiences and instead replace this sweeping notion of individualism. This means that rather than recognizing gender as a factor shaping their professional, they prefer to view their success, challenges, and interactions as stemming purely from personal effort and choice. In their works on the discourse Spanish by Martin Rojo and Callejo in 1995 claims that sexism is inhibited in discourse. Social changes in women's position in general and their access to the workplace in particular, nowadays we come across fewer explicitly sexist remarks. How social changes in gender roles and increased workplace access for women have contributed to a decline in explicitly sexist remarks in professional settings. Rather, as Martin Rojo and Callejo in 1995 maintain, the man's excessive emphasis of self-exoneration in discourse shows that there is an awareness of a feminist criticism indicates that men are aware of feminist criticism that challenge workplace inequalities. Rather than addressing systematic discrimination directly, the discourse rationalized directions of resisting full accountability. This is also evident in ways in which female managers oppose normalization and dominance through a discourse of deconstruction and a discourse of liberation or reconstruction. Martin Rojo in 1995 they refused to accept assumptions about leadership that favor men, exposing the biases and inequalities within workplace that communication. Instead of just breaking down existing norms, they also work to reshape workplace communication in ways that empower women. In addition, a discourse liberation describes the female executives' attempt to resist dominant discourse by ignoring them.
Good afternoon. My name is Alan Gibidanya and I'm the presenter. I will discuss about in a double bind under the glass ceiling. So this topic or this report examines the intersection of the double bind phenomenon and the glass ceiling effect, particularly focusing on the impact on women in the workplace. So first one. The definition of double bind by Gregory Bateson work. The double bind, as defined by Gregory Bateson and his colleagues in the 1950s, is a communication dilemma where an individual receives two or more conflicting messages, making it impossible to respond in a way that satisfies them. So Bateson theory originated from his research on the origin of schizophrenia. He believes that growing up in a family environment where double binds were frequent could lead to confusion in thinking and communication, potentially contributing to the development of the disorder. So, next one. Understanding the double bind. So, double bind, a concept originating in a family system therapy, describe as situations where a person receives two or more conflicting messages. So, and is unable to comment on the inherent contradiction. So this often creates feeling of helplessness, confusion, and anxiety. And the workplace might uh, manifest as a woman being told to be assertive yet simultaneously penalized for being seen as too aggressive. They are expected to both collaborative and independent, nurturing yet decisive, leading to a situation where no matter their action, they are potentially criticized. So, example, leadership dilemma for the woman. So, these are the example context. A woman, let's call her Sarah, is a senior manager in a tech company. She is ambitious and has consistently delivered strong result, making her candidate for a promotion to a director position. So, expectation of assertiveness. So, Sarah is expected to demonstrate a strong leadership quality which often include being assertive, decisive, and confident. So, however, these traits are traditionally associated with masculine leadership style. When she exhibits these qualities, she is often perceived as aggressive or overly domineering. So if Sarah adopts a more nurturing approach, which is Stereotypically viewed as feminine, she is seen like lacking the touches required for leadership in this scenario. She may be liked by her team for being approachable and empathetic, but is simultaneously viewed as less competent or authoritative by her superiors. So the outcome, if Sarah chooses to be assertive, she risks being labeled as too aggressive, which can lead to backlash from her colleagues and hinder her chances of promotion. So if she opts for a more nurturing approach, she may gain popularity but lose respect and credibility among decision makers, ultimately affecting her career advancement. So this situation uh, exemplifies the double bind women often face in leadership roles. They are criticized no matter which path they choose, so leading to frustration and burnout. So research indicates that a significant percentage of women experience similar double binds in their careers, contributing of the underrepresentation of women in a leadership position and reinforcing the glass ceiling effect. So this is the conclusion. So the double bind intensifies the effect of the glass ceiling for a woman by understanding the nature of this interaction and implementing supportive policies. Companies can create more equitable, more environment where women have fair chance to teach their full potential. Continuously effort to challenge systematic biases, promoting inclusive leadership and fostering an environment that valued both individual achievement and collaboration in paramount to breaking down this barrier.
Breaking the Glass Ceiling: Gender, Language, and Workplace Dynamics, based on McConnell Ginnett 2000, Walsh in 2001, Riskin and Drews in 1990. Family responsibilities and long hours cultures. Women, often deterred by long working hours, publishing demands, conferring conference travel and networking, family responsibilities, limit participations. Gender schemas and bias. Dominant gender schemas affect expectations. For the bias examples, men's success is hard work. Women's success, luck or easy tasks. Lingering biases disadvantage women. Importance of collective actions. Academic researchers must expose hidden gender biases. Linguistic awareness plus collective political actions. Sustainable change. Changing masculine norms. Walsh in 2001. Rise of women in Church of England. British politics. Westminster Northern Ireland Women's Coalitions. Challenge to masculine norms. Creation of a new lads network. Women develop alternative communication styles. Women-only networks and influence. Women-only group effective if they integrate diverse women's perspectives. Example, Northern Ireland Women's Coalitions focus on interpersonal communications. Caution on celebrating women's entry. Women often enter fields after loss of pay, prestige, autonomy, through breakthrough in leadership or government corporations are rare.
Hi, I'm Monita Madayag and I will present to you the Changing the Discourse in Organization. Changing the Discourse in an organization involves shifting in how conversation and communication occur to influence perspective and ultimately drive change. It's about reframing how issues are discussed, decisions are made, and actions are taken within the organization. Here's the factor for necessary for effective discourse change. Number one is top-down commitment. Leadership must champion the change, actively participating, the holding others accountable. This include collecting resources, providing training, and communicating the organization commitment to the gender equality. The second one is bottom-up engagement. Employees at all levels must be involved in the process. Their input, feedback, and participation are crucial for ensuring that the changes are relevant and sustainable. And the third one is accountability mechanism. Clear processes for addressing distance and gender bias and discrimination must be established and enforced. These include having clear reporting mechanism and consequences for violation. Number 4 is training and education. Comprehensive training and unconscious bias include communication, and gender equality is essential for equipping employees with the knowledge and skill to navigate the new discourse. And the 5 is ongoing monitoring and evaluation. Regardless, assessing progress, collecting data, and adapting strategies based on feedback necessary to ensure that the changes for effective and sustained. And the second to the last is external pressure and accountability. External pressure from stakeholders, investors, customers, and regulations can help organizations to prioritize gender equality. This can include public reporting requirements and pressure from activist groups. And the last one is alignment, the broader social movement. Organizational discourse can change to be part broader social movement working toward gender equality. This include collaboration with other organizations supporting relevant advocacy groups and aligning with wider social justice initiatives. Changing organizational discourse is a vital step toward achieving gender equality, but it must be a part of a larger multifaceted strategy that involves leadership commitment, employee engagement and accountability mechanism, training, ongoing evaluation, and alignment with broader social movement. Only can last and meaningful change to be achieved.